11. Underground Man and Elite Man. Dostoevsky, in Notes from Underground, pointed to a new power in modern culture, the underground man. Dostoevsky's underground man introduces himself by declaring, quote, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I used to be in the government service, but am no longer. I was a spiteful official. I was rude and took pleasure in being so." The sickness of the underground man then and now is first primarily spiritual, mental and religious, although it has its psychosomatic repercussions. The underground man not only has no part in the faith and movement of his civilization, but is also a sardonic parasite who finds his life in the progressive death of the host body. The underground man cherishes an outhouse view of society. For him, the only honest and satisfying perspective is from the bottom of a cesspool, looking up. The consequences of such a position are predictable, and to the underground man, a source of masochistic satisfaction. The view from the cesspool feeds his resentment against and hatred of civilization. He wants to reduce civilization to the level of the cesspool, and every scandal and every book that reinforces his view of society is welcomed with delight. Second, the underground man is marked by a radical self-absorption. Dostoevsky's character says, "But what can a decent man speak of with most pleasure?" Answer, "Of himself." "Well, so I will talk about myself." The boundaries of the universe are limited to the confines of the ego and its will. The world of man becomes psychology, his psychology. From a subject of minor importance, our era has seen psychology become the major growth industry of our time. What began in Kant, Stirner, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche is perfected in the underground man who has reduced reality to the individual ego. Third, in this sick world of the underground man, every morbid and diseased aspect of the ego is not only a momentous fact, but also a prized one. As Dostoevsky's underground man observed, "People do pride themselves on their diseases, and I do, maybe, more than anyone." The works of Henry Miller and Xaviera Hollander, in themselves of no merit, are in this sense significant. They mark the emergence with pride of the underground people, proud of their self-absorption and sickness and determined to establish them as the new health. Works that make masochism, sadism, bestiality, homosexuality, coprophilia, etc. a matter of erotic delight and respectability are eagerly welcomed and hailed as the new wisdom. The underground man has captured many citadels of learning and criticism and made them resound with the self-justification of his being. Fourth, the underground man is what he is by choice, because he prefers his way of life and nurses its every quiver and anguish. He makes himself a victim in order to feed his hate. In his paranoid imagination, the higher world is in a conspiracy against him because it has laws and rules that contradict his ego and will. As a result, he nurses an unrelenting and irrational hatred against it. The underground man chooses negation as the safer way. He prefers displeasure as his source of pleasure because his ego can effortlessly and endlessly imagine a chain of wrongdoing against it, and his pleasurable answer to the world is a lifelong response of spite against it. Thus, fifth, the underground man cultivates his status and nature. He is not a barbarian from without, but the deliberate and malicious barbarian from within. His purpose is not to cure his condition, but to cultivate it. Henry Miller's success has been his cultivation of the role of the new barbarian, the man from underground who proudly announces his contempt for God and for civilization. Miller's affirmation is chaos and destruction. Judging by his own accounts, one is aware that Miller's only real inner crisis was to recognize that from the beginning he was by disposition an underground man. Even as a child, when I lacked for nothing, I wanted to die. I wanted to surrender because I saw no sense in struggling. I felt that nothing would be proved, substantiated, added or subtracted by continuing an existence which I had not asked for. To want to change the condition of affairs seemed futile to me. Nothing would be altered. I was convinced, except by a change of heart, and who would change the hearts of men? Now and then a friend was converted. It was something to make me puke. I had no more need of God than he had of me, and if there were one, I often said to myself, I would meet him calmly and spit in his face. This certainly involves a suppression of the will to live and a cultivation of the will to death. But by means of semantic juggling, this will to death in its every manifestation, pornographic and otherwise, is called the will to live. The underground man, with his hatred of life, nurses the delusion of radical persecution, even when all goes well. The world, he declares, is always against him, even though all he wants to do is to live in peace. From Darwin to Miller, the myth of persecution has been carefully cultivated. In 1859, Darwin's Origin of Species sold out its entire edition on the day of publication and met worldwide receptivity from churchmen, critics, and public. Only a handful of scientists and one or two churchmen stood out against the crowd, and their mainly sober comments were called persecution. Sixth, underground man's seeming love of peace and life masks a deep hostility, and without hostility there can be no pornography. The language of sex in pornography is the language of hostility, aggression, and warfare. The honesty sexual language called for, beginning with F, is heavily charged with aggression. It also depersonalizes sex. Aggression and depersonalization lead to both pornography and a false virtue, of which prudery is an aspect. Both factors were strong in what has been called Victorianism. False virtue maintains a depersonalized form while despising the meaning. These two dispositions were present in the case of Lord Ward. Lord Ward's favourite pastime was to gaze for hours on end at his wife as she lay naked, except for her jewels, on a sofa draped with black satin. When Lady Ward complained to her parents of scenes that caused her first terror, then disgust, they told her that her husband's peculiarity came within the meaning of the marriage vows, and that she must submit to his humours. The rest of the story, though not strictly relevant to our immediate theme, is not uninstructive. Lord Duplin's appreciation of Lady Ward was markedly less passive than her husband's. When the latter discovered her infidelity, she turned her into the streets at 3 a.m. Although she was pregnant, her parents refused to shelter her. She died soon afterwards. Lord Ward, described as a pleasant man, wrenched apart the corpse's jaws to show friends how bad his wife's teeth had been. Seventh, the goal of this depersonalization is destruction, the will to destroy. Whenever we depersonalize anyone in our thinking and relationships, we are to that extent regarding them as meaningless or dead to us. If we promise this depersonalization with hostility towards them, then we are willing their death. This fact should tell us much about most modern psychologies. During this writer's university days, the psychology department and its textbooks made no mention of mind or consciousness when discussing man. The language was one of drives and responses. One psychologist of the day dismissed consciousness as an epiphenomenon. This radical depersonalization of man leads logically to a view of man and woman that reduces them to their genital organs. To illustrate, an underground man with university degrees declares emphatically that a woman, any woman, is, quote, nothing but a cunt, end quote. This is pornography. It is marked by a voyeuristic impersonalism and the hostility that is the basic ingredient of sadism and masochism, or better, sadomasochism. It is not, however, a form of pornography that can be legislated against. It is the outcropping of humanism in its dying and depersonalized form. It is a religious statement about life, an affirmation of faith that emphatically denies personalism to everything but the private ego. The world is limited to one person, the subject, and all other people are reduced to their usability by him. It is the humanistic analogue to God's declaration, I am the Lord, and there is none else, Isaiah 45:6. Although Henry Miller declared that everything has soul, in practice all things are for his use, or they mean little or nothing. It is his soul and his consciousness that really matter to him, and he affirms his own ultimacy. Quote, and now here I am, sailing down the river in my little canoe. Anything you would like to have me do, I will do for you, gratis. This is a land of F, in which there are no animals, no trees, no stars, no problems. Here the spermatozoon reigns supreme. Nothing is determined in advance. The future is absolutely uncertain. The past is non-existent. Sailing down the river, slow as the hookworm, but tiny enough to make every bend, and slippery as an eel withal. What is your name? Shouts someone. My name? Why, just call me God. God, the embryo. I go sailing on. Somebody would like to buy me a hat. What size do you wear? Imbecile, he shouts. What size? Why, size X. And why do you shout at me? Am I supposed to be deaf? The hat is lost at the next cataract. Don't be for the hat. Does God need a hat? God needs only to become God, more and more God. End quote. Because he is God, the other person is only at best a fool. However, even as the underground man with his total self-absorption welcomes the modern worldview because he can reduce other people to his tools thereby, he rages against the idea of being himself something to be used. The student revolutionists of the early 1960s who rebelled against being classified by computers, do not fold, staple, or mutilate, insisted on treating all others as impersonal nothings. Dostoevsky's underground man felt the same way. Quote, and this is not all. Even if man really were nothing but a piano key, even if this were proved to him by natural science and mathematics, even then he would not become reasonable, but would purposely do something perverse out of simple ingratitude, simply to gain his point. And if he does not find means, he will contrive destruction and chaos, will contrive sufferings of all sorts, only to gain his point. He will launch a curse upon the world, and as only man can curse, it is his privilege, the primary distinction between him and other animals. It may be by his curse alone he will attain his object, that is, convince himself that he is a man and not a piano key. If you say that all this too can be calculated and tabulated, chaos and darkness and curses, so that the mere possibility of calculating it all beforehand would stop it all, and reason would reassert itself, then man would purposely go mad in order to be rid of reason and gain his point. End quote. This is underground man, proud in his negation, spitefulness and hatred reducing all the world to nothing so that he can be something. There can be no pattern or structure, or to use Sartre's language, essence in the universe or in himself that is not of his own making. Man must make his own essence, whatever essence things external may have. They can have that essence only by his ordination or recognition. Underground man has been with us since antiquity. He is always there, ready to take over and to destroy, to annihilate a world he has never made because he did not make it. Underground man is thus a constant factor, always with us, always delighted at an opportunity to back up the sewers to overflow the temple and palace. He is not the key, and concentration on him, as though he were the heart of the problem, is a serious mistake. In every era, history is dominated by a self-conscious elite, men who are moved by a sense of power and privilege or by a faith that commands society through them. It is not majorities that govern history, but dedicated minorities. Elite man is future-oriented. He sees the world and society in terms of a faith and a pattern that are inescapable truths, and he governs history by these things. When one elite loses faith, it is replaced by another. If a new elite is not immediately forthcoming, then underground man gleefully takes over to vent his spite and depredation. To concentrate on what underground man is doing is to join his ranks in a policy of negation. To all too great an extent, this is what the anti-pornography movement has done. Its affinities with the underground man are strong. A common scientism, a depersonalization of reality, an absence of faith and purpose, and a view of action as negation. The anti-pornography movement too often has a nostalgia for the past rather than a pattern for the future. It is not an elite, but the confused heirs of a bygone elite. To understand the American scene, it is important to recognize the roles of elite groups in the United States. Since this is the briefest of surveys, only 3 major groups will be cited, and these only in passing. The Puritans were the first major elite group. They dominated the colonial scene and the early years of the United States. The Puritan worldview soon commanded all the colonies and became progressively more powerful in the South. That worldview embraced the obligation to establish God's law order on earth and to make America God's new Zion by the total dedication of all things to the sovereign and triune God and their subservience to his law. In its dominant forms, the Puritan faith was postmillennial, that is, it asserted the certainty and inevitability of God's triumph in history. Its work ethic produced a purposive vitality that led to inventiveness, exploration, and dominion. So deeply did the Puritan worldview shape America that, even though its dominance is long since gone, issues and directions in American life still reflect the Puritan point of view. Puritanism, however, much despised, is still under the skin of conservatives, liberals, and radicals to a great extent. The second major elite group was Unitarian. Unitarianism and its related movements began to dominate American life by the 1850s and especially after 1860. Socialism, anarchism, transcendentalism, and much more were byproducts of this elite group. Its anarchism and socialism were closely related. Elite Unitarians had no vision of society. Elite man either shaped all others or he went his own way. Secession was a product of Unitarianism. It was this origin that kept the South from adopting it in the days of Calhoun. The leaders of the South, Jefferson Davis and especially Alexander H. Stephens, were not happy with the idea of secession. Their intellectual roots were in a Southern elite that was overwhelmed by the war. Southern theologians like James Thornwell, Robert Dabney, and Palmer represented a part of the older Calvinism, which Unitarianism was determined to destroy. Unitarianism affirmed the goodness of man, inevitable progress, and the ultimacy of the present, modernity. Unitarianism infiltrated all other religious groups and also education. Its first victory, in fact, was education. Very early it commanded historiography and began at once to rewrite American history in the Unitarian image. The revival of Puritan studies in the past generation has, ironically, begun in the old Unitarian stronghold, Harvard. The revival has not yet been effective to the point of replacing the essential Unitarian reading of American history. History, once a theological discipline, is within a humanistic and Unitarian domain. This shift took place much earlier in Europe. Another major educational victory of Unitarianism was the command of education by the state through the efforts of dedicated Unitarians, headed by James G. Carter and Horace Mann. Before the 19th century was over, the universities were also captured. Unitarianism as a movement and a temper, rather than as an institution and a church, is still a powerful force, but it is no longer in the forefront, and its original optimism has become a querulous complaint against reaction. Like conservatism, it is now better at seeing enemies gathering against it than at acting and commanding. It is a critical rather than a commanding force, and more effective in turning on its leaders, such as Lyndon Johnson, than in following them. A third elite has also been briefly and powerfully in evidence in the 20th century, but it is already in the process of dissolution. I refer to the Jewish elite. Its kinship to Unitarianism has been close, but its drive more specifically political and equalitarian. Coming as immigrants from the Old World, the Jewish elite was determined to use the opportunities of the New World to create heaven on earth, to remove all evils, hatred, bondage, and bigotry. The Jew quickly sacrificed his old orthodoxy and waged war on all other orthodoxies. By his dedication, he has earned eminence and power. It has been said that 75% of all serious books have a Jewish audience, and that, except for the independently wealthy Kennedys, all major candidates in recent years have had at least 50% of their contributions from Jewish sources. The bigots who condemn the Jews for this fail to recognize that power is commanded by those who work for it and are ready to pay its price. Few things are more ridiculous than the belief of some that because they are of Anglo-Saxon descent, power is rightfully theirs, and anyone else who assumes it is by definition evil and a lower breed. A majority or a minority will always dispossess itself when it assumes that power is an inherited birthright and refuses to exercise the responsibilities of power. The remnants of the Puritan and Unitarian elites expect men to serve them because they are what they are, but what they fail to realize is that they are now largely impotent. In both circles, intellectual effort has been replaced by emotional binges. Goodwill and good intentions, hold a good thought, have replaced intelligence and study. The content of preaching in evangelical and modernist Unitarian circles is appallingly childish and slight, and the assumption is in effect that if everybody makes the right affirmations, somehow all will be well. Pietism and its twin sister Romanticism have corroded the minds of evangelicals and Unitarians. The contents of political speeches are as wretched as those of pulpiteering, if not worse. The high point of all this was the ineffectual John F. Kennedy, whose words and person had a charismatic effect that passed for erudition and progress. Since then, disillusionment with Kennedy has not altered matters. There is a search for a new charismatic leadership. In the churches, the charismatic movement represents the last stages of bankruptcy, but it is held to be the birth of a new reformation. The Jewish elite, while intellectually the heir of Unitarianism, has been, by virtue of its background of orthodoxy, related also to Puritanism. It has emphasized, like the Puritan elite, intelligence and work. It is a commonplace that for some years Jews have been the better students at schools. In California, for a time, this was also true of Japanese students. The war against orthodoxy, however, has led to trouble in the ranks. Jewish young people now have the same problem of delinquency, rebellion, and experimentation as other youngsters, and the breakdown of the Jewish family because of permissiveness is destroying its future. At the same time, the inadequacy of intelligence and work in an age of crisis is becoming more and more apparent. A humanistic faith is no longer adequate, and the Jewish elite is at least in crisis and probably in a state of dissolution. Jewish young people go home for a university holiday, deliberately sporting the badge of an Arab terrorist group dedicated to the destruction of Israel, then it is clear that internal decay has set in. Essential to the decay of every elite group is a loss of faith. Essential to the rise of any elite group is a strong and commanding faith. Underground man struts on the stage today because no one else commands it. Basic to command is not only a faith, but a systematic faith. The fundamental premise of systematics is that the universe is a unity and that all reality is one universal law order under God. Without a background of systematics, science cannot develop, nor is progress possible. With the decay of systematics, a culture decays because meaning and direction are gone. It is, however, a fundamental premise of modern theology and of much evangelicalism, as well as of most modern philosophy, that systematics must be abandoned as impossible. There is no universe of law, being, or meaning. There is only brute factuality. This position is not only the source of pornography, but also the ultimate in pornography. It is the radical reduction of all things outside man's ego to meaninglessness, and it is the depersonalizing of all external reality. In the biblical perspective, every fact in the universe is a personal fact and has meaning because it is the creation of the totally personal God. The universe has total meaning. That is, there is no area of it that is without meaning or purpose, or that can be reduced to a surd, to a meaningless, irrational nucleus. But it is precisely the modern belief that life is in fact absurd, opposed to manifest truth, irrational, meaningless, preposterous, and ridiculous. All things are the same, meaningless, so that the only meaning possible is a purely private meaning. The only possible world is the purely private world, and the only possible affirmation is a purely private affirmation, which can mean anything or nothing. Henry Miller gives us the results. Man, the scavenger. Quote, I shall be as a visitor to this earth, partaking of its blessings and carrying off its gifts. I shall neither serve nor be served. I shall seek the end in myself. Death is behind me and birth too. I'm going to live now among the life maladies. I'm going to live the spiritual life of the pygmy, the secret life of the little man in the wilderness of the bush. Inner and outer have changed places. Equilibrium is no longer the goal. The scales must be destroyed. End quote. Miller openly declares himself to be a scavenger, a hyena, avowing that, quote, I am only spiritually dead. Physically, I am alive. Morally, I am free. The world which I have departed is a menagerie. The dawn is breaking on a new world, a jungle world in which the lean spirits roam with sharp claws. If I am a hyena, I am a lean and hungry one. I go forth to fatten myself. End quote. Miller is now tame fare compared to those who have succeeded him. His successors have not equalled his honesty. Neither condemnation nor suppression of Miller and his heirs will suffice. They simply voice the essential faith of the modern era. Nor is the answer simply a new elite. We have no lack of education and intelligence today. The ingredients for leadership are all around us, but the faith to motivate them is lacking. Until it is forthcoming, underground man will continue to work his will, and pornography will be one more facet of cultural decay.